The brass knocker on the Davenport plantation house struck 3 times against the heavy door, just as the last orange of dusk bled into night on October 9th, 1844. Elias Turner walked through the dim hallway to answer it, his hands still carrying the scent of the North Florida cotton fields, roughened by years of labor and sun. When he pulled open that thick cypress door, no one stood outside, nothing but the empty stretch of porch and the dark sweep of pine woods beyond. But the knocker, that was the part folks never understood later. It kept tapping, slow, measured, steady as a pulse. 3 strikes, then silence, then, an hour later, 3 more. And by sunrise, Elias Turner was gone without a trace, not a footprint, not a whisper. And that knocker? It tapped on like it remembered him, even after he stepped out of the world. The Davenport plantation covered nearly 1,800 acres of North Florida land, rich earth that had been worked by enslaved hands since before Elias was born. Cotton fields stretched so far across the landscape that from the porch of the big house they looked like an ocean of whitecaps. The manor sat raised on brick pillars, whitewashed and massive, with tall columns and iron-trimmed windows that glimmered in late afternoon light like they held secrets. Elias had been born 27 years earlier, not far from those fields, in a row of weathered cabins where the enslaved community lived. His mother, Nora, died the night he came into the world, and his father, Samuel Turner, had been sold off to a plantation in Georgia before Elias was old enough to understand why his father never came back. He grew up under the care of his grandmother, Mama Ruth, a woman whose wisdom stretched far past the borders of this world. She taught him herbs and remedies, and she taught him to read in secret by candle flame, using an old Bible she kept hidden beneath the floorboards of their cabin.
The Davenport family themselves consisted of Colonel Whitford Davenport, a man quick to anger and stubborn in pride, 50 years old with a history of cruelty masked behind polished manners. His wife, Maribel, floated through each day pretending pain and suffering weren't the foundation of her comfort. Their son, Caleb Davenport, 23, had recently returned from studying business in New Orleans. Their daughter, Annalise, just 16, carried more curiosity than her parents liked, a trait Maribel tried to tame but never quite managed. Elias's work put him half in the fields and half in the house. He could chop cotton faster than most, but he was also reliable, quiet, and quick on his feet, traits the colonel valued when company came. That evening, the colonel expected guests from Tallahassee, men with opinions about cotton futures and the proposed railroad routes creeping across the South. The big house bustled with preparations. Maribel ordered tablecloths changed twice, Annalise rearranged flowers 3 times, and Caleb set out bourbon like it was a display of wealth rather than a drink. Elias had been washed, given cleaner clothes, and stationed near the dining room to assist. The guests arrived right after sunset, 3 men in tailored coats, smelling of cigars and riverboats, talking loud and laughing louder. Elias moved silently between them with bottles of wine and platters of food, listening as they discussed enslaved people like livestock, whether it was better to work them until they broke or feed them enough to keep them working longer. Caleb argued his theories about maximizing labor like he'd invented the concept. Colonel Davenport watched his son with an expression that mixed pride and unease. It was just after 9 when the knocker sounded. 3 sharp raps, clear as a bell. Elias paused in the hallway, a tray in hand. The noise seemed to roll through the house, vibrating against the walls. He set the tray aside and walked toward the door, passing portraits of the Davenport ancestors who stared down from their gilded frames like judges. He reached the door, and the knocker struck again. 3 more taps. Perfect. Even. Identical. He opened the door. No one. Not a soul on the porch. Not a breeze stirring the Spanish moss. Just silence. Elias stepped out, scanning the long drive where lantern light reached only a little before being swallowed by darkness. He checked behind the porch columns. Nothing, not even a footprint in the patch of soft earth near the steps. Behind him, the knocker sounded again. 3 clean strikes. Elias turned slowly. The brass ring lifted and fell on its own, beating its rhythm against the striker plate, though nothing touched it. His heartbeat kicked up, cold prickling up his arms, despite the warm Florida night. "Elias!" Colonel Davenport's voice bounced down the hallway. "Who's at the door?" "No one, sir." "Then why'd you open it?" Before Elias could answer, the knocker tapped once more, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Colonel Davenport stepped onto the porch, lantern light catching the confusion on his face. He grabbed the knocker, tested its weight, its hinges, its screws. He examined it like a man trying to wrestle the world back into something explainable. Draft from the river. Metal settling. Something ordinary. But even as he said it, the knocker lifted and dropped again. 3 perfect strikes. This time, the colonel jerked back like the thing had bitten him. Elias felt the fear in the air shift, like something unseen had stepped into the room with them, and everyone sensed it, even if their minds refused to understand it. That was the beginning. The moment everything changed. The moment Elias Turner's fate slipped away from the world of fields and chains and stepped towards something else. Something that would echo through stories for generations. And all of it started with a knock. 3 beats, no hand behind it.
The rest of the evening dragged on with forced smiles and stiff conversation coming from the dining room, but Elias's attention never drifted far from the front door. The guests talked louder than before, their confidence diluted by the strange interruption, and the colonel poured bourbon for them with a hand that trembled more than he intended. Annalise slipped out from behind her mother's chair at one point, curiosity bright as candlelight in her eyes. "Did someone come, Elias? Who was knocking?" she whispered when she found him standing near the hallway. "No one, miss," he replied quietly, eyes lowered. The porch was empty. "That's impossible," she said, though not with disbelief, more with wonder, as if the world had suddenly become more interesting. The knock did not return again during dinner. It waited, patient, deliberate, almost respectful. But at 11 o'clock, just when the men retired to the colonel's study for cigars and fresh talk of railroad profits, the knocker struck again, 3 times. Clear, measured, deadly calm. The sound cut through the house like a blade. Maribel's embroidery slipped from her hands. The guests stopped mid-sentence. Even the fire in the study seemed to quiet itself. Elias felt it before he heard it, that same cold edge sliding through the air, brushing against the back of his neck, the kind of cold that didn't belong anywhere in a Florida October night. Colonel Davenport rose from his leather chair, his jaw set tighter than his grip on the brandy glass. "Elias," he said, though the command wavered, "open the door." Elias obeyed, because what else could he do? This time he already knew what he would find. Nothing. No figure in the yard, no carriage, no stray animal that might have nudged the brass ring. Just darkness, heavy and deep. He took one step onto the porch, and that same cold, unnatural, sharp, wrapped around him like fingers pressing against his ribs. It wasn't the cold of air. It was the cold of something that didn't belong to this world. Behind him, Colonel Davenport joined him on the porch, the guests pushing in behind the colonel, eagerness and fear wrestling in their expressions. As they watched, the knocker rose again, in full view of all of them. The brass ring lifted and fell once, twice, 3 times. One of the visitors, a merchant from Apalachicola, with a thick mustache and a trembling hand, crossed himself and whispered, "Lord, help us."
"This is nonsense," Caleb snapped, stepping forward as if anger alone could banish what was happening. "A trick. Someone is hiding somewhere." Elias shook his head before he could stop himself. "Ain't nobody out here." Caleb shot him a glare, sharp enough to cut. But his anger faltered when the knocker tapped again, 3 crisp knocks, while his face was inches from it. Colonel Davenport slammed the door shut, as if the sight offended him. "Everyone to bed! We'll find the cause in daylight. There is a reason for everything." But his voice told a different truth. He was frightened. Deeply. Elias was dismissed to the enslaved quarters shortly after, walking across the dark yard where the air felt thick with whispers, as if the trees themselves knew something was coming. Word had already spread. News moved faster than fire on a dry field. People stepped out of their cabins, eyes wide, their voices hushed when they asked, "What happened up at the big house? What you see, Elias? What that knockin' mean?" But Elias didn't answer. Not until he reached the cabin where Mama Ruth sat waiting on the step, rocking slowly like she'd been expecting him the whole time. Her age had bent her body, but not her spirit. Her eyes still burned with clarity that didn't seem earthly. "Sit, child. Tell me everything." And he did. Every tap, every cold breath, every moment where the air felt like something was watching from the shadows. When he finished, Mama Ruth didn't speak at first. She stared into the fire pit in front of the cabin, watching flames lick upward toward the night sky. "The door done opened," she finally whispered. "What door?" "Not one made of wood," she said, her voice low. "A door between worlds, between what is and what might be. And once it opens, it calls a name. Tonight, it called yours." Elias's stomach tightened. "Why me? You been marked since birth. Born on a night the wind didn't move and the sky wouldn't change. That means something. You always felt different. You always knew the world ain't fixed the way they say it is." He couldn't deny it. There had always been that nagging sense, like he belonged to something beyond the Davenport fields, like he was waiting for something he couldn't name. Mama Ruth placed her hand over his. It felt warm and fragile, but the strength behind it was undeniable. "This thing that's calling you, it ain't evil, but it ain't gentle neither. It opens only for one reason." "What reason?" Elias whispered. "To offer a choice, a way out. But not just a way out for your body." Elias stared into her wise, clouded eyes. "Then what?" "A way out for your soul." That night, Elias could not sleep. He lay on his pallet, staring at the ceiling of the cabin as the air shifted and changed, like the night itself was holding its breath. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, he heard it again. 3 soft knocks, but this time, he didn't hear them from the big house. They echoed inside his mind, calling, inviting. When the bell rang the next morning, calling everyone to the fields, he still hadn't closed his eyes. The sun rose sluggish and gray, mist clinging to the ground like it didn't want to disperse. The overseer, Mr. Garrison, strode into the yard with his whip curled tight at his hip. A cruel smile stretched across his face in a way that made the morning feel even heavier. "Move," he barked. "Master Davenport wants extra work today to make up for last night's foolishness. Anyone fall behind, they get the lash." He paused when he saw Elias. "You. The master wants you at the house all day. Says you're to stand watch on that door. Says you're to find out who been playing games." He laughed, even though ain't nobody that stupid. But someone, or something, had been knocking, and Elias suspected it wasn't finished.
Elias spent the entire day sitting in a straight-back chair positioned exactly where Colonel Davenport wanted him, facing the front door of the manor house. The brass knocker, a lion's head with a heavy ring held between its teeth, hung unmoving in the warm daylight. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, dust drifting lazily in the beams. Everything looked normal, ordinary, harmless, which made the night before feel even more impossible. The house moved with its usual patterns around him. Servants swept the polished floors, carried trays, and scrubbed silverware. Maribel's footsteps glided through the upper hall as she directed housework. Annalise practiced piano in the music room, her hesitant notes floating like nervous birds. Caleb sat in the study, trying to immerse himself in business ledgers, although Elias could tell, just by Caleb's clipped movements, that the knocking had lodged itself inside his mind like a splinter. Colonel Davenport checked on Elias twice, both times asking the same question. "Anything unusual?" Each time Elias answered, "No, sir." And each time the colonel walked away more unsettled than before. Elias watched the knocker. He studied it for hours. He memorized every scratch in the brass, every faint dent, every reflection in its polished surface. It gave no hint of last night's impossible movements. Around mid-afternoon, Annalise drifted into the hallway. She carried a book she wasn't supposed to be reading, Elias knew because she kept glancing over her shoulder like someone might catch her. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Caleb says the knocker moved on its own. Did it really?" "Yes, miss," Elias replied, without lifting his gaze to her face. "But that's not—" she caught herself. "That isn't logical. Objects can't move unless something moves them." "Maybe some things don't care about logic," Elias said quietly. She hesitated, then whispered, "Do you think it will knock again tonight?" Elias didn't dare answer. He didn't need to. They both knew the truth. When night finally fell, a hush fell with it. The kind of hush that seemed unnatural, as if the air were bracing itself. The moment the clock in the hallway struck 7, the knocker tapped. 3 steady knocks. This time the sound rolled deeper through the house. Windows rattled in their frames. The lantern light flickered, and Elias felt the cold breeze again, not from outside, but from somewhere else. From somewhere the mind wasn't built to understand. Dinner was only half eaten when the colonel shoved his chair back with a sharp scrape. The entire family rose with him, Maribel pale, Annalise gripping the back of her mother's dress, Caleb moving stiff-legged with dread disguised as irritation. Elias followed them to the front hallway. Colonel Davenport grabbed the door handle and yanked it open, as if he could catch whatever was knocking off guard. But the porch stood empty, bathed in silver moonlight. And then, the knocker lifted with the door wide open, no wood beneath it, nothing to strike against. Yet it moved. Up, down, 3 times. 3 invisible hits that landed like hammer blows in everyone's chest. Maribel gasped and clutched her throat. Annalise backed away until she hit the wall. Caleb's face turned the ghostly color of bleached cloth. Even the colonel stumbled a step. "Shut it," he said hoarsely. Caleb slammed the door, and the moment the latch clicked, the knocker tapped again. The sound seemed deliberate, almost communicative. The family scattered afterward, shaken and silent. Servants murmured prayers. Everyone seemed to be watching the air around them as if expecting a shape to materialize. Colonel Davenport sent a messenger to town at dawn the next morning, ordering the local priest, Father Coleman, to come immediately. The priest arrived on horseback by noon the following day, a thin man with stern features and a confidence he wore like armor. He carried a Bible, a crucifix, and a vial of holy water he seemed eager to use. He walked to the house with a rigid posture, muttering Latin beneath his breath as he sprinkled water in doorways. He examined the knocker with a frown. He blessed it. He prayed over it. He commanded in the name of all holy things for whatever spirit lingered to depart. But that night at 7 o'clock, the knocker tapped again. Father Coleman stood beside it when it did. The color drained from his face. His prayer book slipped from his fingers. He whispered, "This is not of the usual kind." The next night, he didn't even attempt to bless the door again. By the 4th day, half the region had heard rumors. People arrived by carriage from miles away, some out of fear, others out of desperate curiosity. Elias moved among them with trays of water or lemonade, listening to fragments of conversation. "It's a demon." "No, an angel." "Some trick by the Davenport boy." A warning. A sign. At 7 o'clock sharp, the knocker tapped 3 times before all those watching eyes. The visitors clamored, argued, gasped. One woman fainted dead away. A professor from Pensacola insisted it was mass hysteria right up until the knocker lifted inches from his nose. Colonel Davenport finally ordered the knocker removed. He sent Caleb for tools and called Elias forward. Removing it proved harder than anyone expected. The screws refused to turn as though rusted solid. Caleb grew frustrated and shoved Elias aside to try himself, but the screws didn't budge. "Get back here," the colonel snapped. "Finish the job." Elias gripped the screwdriver, worked the top screw with steady force, and at last felt the stubborn metal begin to give way. When he moved to the second screw, the knocker struck his hand, hard, deliberate. Pain shot up his arm. He gasped, biting down a curse. Caleb stared wide-eyed. "You hit yourself." "No," Elias whispered. "It hit me." And that was when the cold swept in. Sharp, icy, unnatural. It wrapped around his arm, his chest, his lungs, and suddenly he wasn't in the hallway. He was standing in total darkness. Not night, not shadow. Darkness like existence had been erased. Something circled him, unseen but undeniable. A presence. And then it spoke. Not in words, not in sound, but in something deeper, something that filled his mind from the inside. "Why do you hesitate?" Elias stood frozen. "What are you?" "The door is open. The way is waiting. Step forward." He shook his head. "I don't understand." "You asked for freedom your whole life. This is the answer." His breath caught. Freedom. The word hurt just to think about. "Freedom for me or for everyone?" he asked. The presence paused. Then, "For you, only you. The others are not mine to take, not unless they call for me themselves. Your choice closes the way." Elias's heart hammered. Mama Ruth's voice whispered through his memory. "The door opens for one person, one name, and that name was yours." "Can I choose at sunrise?" Elias whispered. The darkness pulsed around him like a living thing. "Dawn," it finally answered. "At dawn, the way closes. Decide before the sun touches the door." And then he was back in the hallway, breathless, sweating, the brass knocker cold beneath his fingers. The colonel stood in front of him, face pale. "Elias, boy, you froze. 5 whole minutes you didn't move." Elias stepped back, rubbing his bruised hand. "Sir, I need to go." "Go?" Caleb scoffed. "Where?" Elias didn't answer. He already knew where, and he knew what sunrise meant. The choice had begun.
Elias left the manor house with his heart pounding in a rhythm that matched the knocker's cold, deliberate taps. Night had settled over Davenport Plantation like a blanket stitched from ink and silence. Lanterns in the enslaved quarters glowed faintly, scattered across the dark yard like small, weary stars. Mama Ruth, as always, sat by the low fire outside their cabin. She didn't look surprised when he approached, almost like she'd been expecting him the moment he stepped out the big house door. "You saw it," she said simply. Elias sank onto the log beside her, his body still trembling. "Yes," she nodded, her expression solemn. "And it spoke to you." "Yes," he whispered,
It offered a way out. It said, "I have till sunrise to decide." Mama Ruth let out a long, slow sigh. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sorrow. It was something older, deeper. Like she'd carried the weight of this moment for years and could finally set it down. You ain't the first one in this world to be offered a choice. But most folks never hear their calling. You did. Others drifted closer then, not to pry, but because the air around Elias held something different now. A pull. A shift. As if something invisible hovered near him, brushing against the edges of their reality. Men and women sat around the fire, no one speaking, all of them understanding instinctively that something sacred, or dangerous, or both, was unfolding. Finally, a young woman named Leela whispered, "What's happening, Elias?" He shook his head. "I don't know how to explain it." Mama Ruth laid a hand on his arm. "It's a crossroads, child. The kind you don't walk away from the same." Silence wrapped around the group like a soft cloth. Someone began humming an old hymn, a song about crossing rivers and laying burdens down. Others joined, voices weaving together until the sound felt like prayer, like memory, like every hope they'd spoken only in their hearts. When the song faded, Elias stood. The others watched him with quiet eyes. "I just need a moment," he said, voice cracking slightly. He walked away from the fire, past the cabins, past the washing lines and the old well, until he reached the edge of the cotton fields. Under the moonlight, the rows stretched for miles, white bowls glowing pale, the plants rustling softly in the night wind. He stared out over them, remembering his mother's sweat, his grandmother's whip scars, his own years of bending, picking, enduring. Everything in his life had happened on this land. Everything he hated, everything he loved. Was he really supposed to leave it behind? To disappear into some unknown elsewhere? He thought of his father, Samuel Turner, a man who had been sold away when Elias was barely old enough to remember his voice. A man who might still be alive somewhere, still enslaved, still looking over horizons and wondering. If Elias walked through the door, he'd leave this world behind without his father ever knowing his fate. But staying meant chains. Staying meant the lash. Staying meant dying on this land. The breeze shifted and he heard the faintest echo of knocking. 3 soft taps, carried on the wind from the big house, calling him, reminding him, waiting. Sunrise was approaching. Elias returned to the fire, where Mama Ruth sat motionless watching the stars. She looked up when he settled beside her. "Do you think I should go?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't pretend to hold answers she didn't have. She said, "I think you should do what your soul knows is right. Not your fear, not your anger, your soul." He swallowed hard. "And what if I choose wrong?" "There ain't no wrong," she said softly. "Only paths, some harder, some kinder, but all leading somewhere." Others around the fire sat in total silence, their faces lit by the flickering glow. Leela wiped at her eyes. Old Henry closed his. Children huddled beside their parents, sensing the weight in the air. And then, midnight. The knocker struck again. 3 distant beats, carried through the dark like the heart of some unseen world. Elias felt it inside his chest. His pulse fell into perfect rhythm with it. Tap, tap, tap. His breath hitched. Mama Ruth's hand tightened around his. Another hour passed. 1 in the morning. 3 more taps. 2 in the morning. 3 taps. 3 in the morning. 3 taps. The rhythm felt like destiny itself beating on the door to his life. Elias stood again.
this time alone. He walked across the plantation grounds, every step heavy with the knowledge that dawn was racing toward him. The big house loomed ahead like a silent giant. Not a single candle flickered in its windows. Even the cicadas seemed to hush as he approached, as if the night held its breath. He slipped around to the back where the kitchen door stood partially open. No one locked it fully during the hot season. He moved through the quiet rooms, passing tables and chairs that cast long moonlit shadows. The house felt different now, like it wasn't asleep, but watching. He reached the front hallway. The brass knocker hung still, waiting. Elias stood before it, breathing hard. He said, "I'm here." The air changed instantly. Cold poured through the room like water rushing through a broken dam, and the presence, the same one from the darkness, unfurled around him. "You have chosen." "Yes," Elias whispered, though fear pressed against his ribs. "But I need you to promise something." The presence paused, listening. "Don't just open doors for me. Promise you'll open doors for others, others in chains, others suffering. Don't let me be the only one." Silence, deep, heavy, then slowly, "You ask for others before yourself. If you do, yes, I promise. Wherever suffering calls, I will answer." Elias closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. Then, "I'm ready." The door swung open, not onto the porch, but into darkness. A darkness threaded with distant lights, stars or something like stars, floating in impossible patterns. A wind blew from that doorway, carrying scents he'd never smelled and sounds he had no words for. Possibility, that's what it felt like, pure possibility. He turned one last time to look at the hallway of the Davenport house. He saw Mama Ruth in his mind, the others in the quarters, the fields, the sky above Florida, all of it, everything that had shaped him. He stepped forward, across the threshold, into the unknown, and the door closed behind him with a soft click, final and quiet as a farewell. Stepping through that doorway felt like falling and floating at the same time, like being pulled apart and woven back together, like bursting into flame and then cooling into morning dew. Time didn't behave. It stretched and collapsed, folding around Elias in ways his mind couldn't grasp. He couldn't say how long the passage lasted. A heartbeat? A lifetime? A single breath that held all the breaths he'd ever taken. Then the sensation snapped, and he was standing on solid ground again. Except it wasn't soil from Florida or from any place he recognized. The surface beneath his feet was dark, not black, but deep, shimmering indigo, like polished stone mixed with night sky. It was warm, almost alive, and when he shifted his weight, the ground responded with a faint hum. Above him hung two moons, one large and pale gold, the other smaller and soft blue, their lights weaving together to cast shifting shadows across the landscape. The sky itself was unfamiliar, dotted with constellations he had never seen, stars arranged in patterns that defied all earthly logic. Elias stared upward, feeling something he had never felt before, wonder without fear. He inhaled sharply. The air tasted faintly of cinnamon and rain and something sweet he couldn't name. In the distance, he heard the gentle rush of water, maybe a river, maybe something else entirely. Then he heard voices, dozens of them, all around him. Elias turned and realized he wasn't alone. A crowd stretched across the strange clearing. Men, women, children.
dressed in clothing from plantations across the South. Some wore ragged work shirts. Others had tattered dresses. A few wore what looked like traveling clothes, torn or soaked through as if they'd come from storms. But every face carried the same expression: bewildered relief, fear giving way to understanding, pain releasing its grip. A woman with gray braids and tired eyes approached him. She looked at him the way someone looks at a long-lost relative, recognition blooming where none should be. "You came through a door?" she asked. "Yes," Elias said. "A knocker in Florida." She smiled, her eyes welling with tears. "Mine was a window in Georgia, opened right in front of me, and when I stepped through, I came here." A man nearby nodded. "I climbed down a well in Virginia, thought it would lead to water, but it led here." A boy barely 8 years old tugged on Elias's sleeve. He said softly, "I walked through a cupboard in Mississippi. Mama told me not to hide in it, but something told me to go, and then I wasn't home no more." Elias knelt to the boy's level, heart aching. "Are you scared?" The boy hesitated, then shook his head. "I don't think so. I think I'm free." That word, free, hung in the air like a prayer, like a blessing. It echoed off the strange hills and warm stone beneath their feet.
Elias stood and looked around as more people gathered, each one telling a story that sounded impossible. And yet here they were, together, in this place beyond the world that had held their chains. He wasn't sure how long they stood there, exchanging stories and names and fragments of lives torn apart by slavery. This new land felt untouched by cruelty, quiet, vast, promising. At some point, the presence, the unseen force that had brought them all here, faded into the background. It didn't speak again. Its task was done. As night passed into the strange dawn of this two-mooned world, Elias felt a calm settle into his bones. Not comfort. Comfort was unfamiliar, but possibility. People began exploring, touching the strange plants, tasting the sweet water from a nearby stream, laughing in ways that had never been safe before, crying without shame. For the first time in their lives, they moved without watching over their shoulders, without anticipating the crack of a whip, without shrinking in fear from any shadow shaped like a white man. There was no overseer, no master, no hunger gnawing at their stomachs, no dread of morning bells. Elias wandered among them, helping where he could. An old man stumbled, and Elias caught him by the elbow. A young mother wrapped her arms protectively around two children, and Elias led them to a soft patch of ground where they could rest. People asked questions he couldn't answer. What is this place? Why were we brought here? Is it heaven? Is it another world? All Elias could say was, "It's not home, and it's not the place we left, but it's better than where we were." As time passed, hours, maybe days, other groups appeared. Some emerged from shadowed archways between trees. Others walked out from shimmering cracks in the air that sealed behind them. Every arrival was the same: confusion, then awe, then quiet relief. And with each new face, Elias felt a deeper certainty settle inside him. His choice had not abandoned anyone. It had opened the way. He remembered Mama Ruth's words, "Some doors don't open for the world. They open for the one who will lead others through." Elias didn't feel like a leader. He felt like a man who had stepped into something bigger than destiny. But still, they came to him for direction, for answers, for calm.
And slowly, almost without realizing it, he began to guide them. He taught some to read using stories from memory. He helped build shelter out of strange vines and stone. He listened when people cried. He mediated when fear sparked arguments. He comforted those who realized freedom felt overwhelming. A new community formed, one shaped not by chains, but by choice. A place carved by hope rather than forced labor. At night, when the two moons rose high and cast shimmering patterns across the warm ground, Elias would walk to the crest of a small hill. From there, he could see the settlement below, people smiling, working, singing in the soft glow of moonlight. He would think of Mama Ruth, the quarters, the fields, the knocker, the cold breath of darkness that had offered him a choice. And he would whisper, "Thank you." Whether the presence heard him or not, he didn't know. But sometimes, only sometimes, a faint breeze brushed his cheek in answer. A sign that the work of opening doors wasn't finished, that others would find their way, just as he had.
Back in Florida, dawn broke over Davenport Plantation with a coldness the region had never known. Colonel Davenport descended the stairs half-dressed, his hair disheveled, his face pale from a night without sleep. He reached the front hallway only to find the door standing wide open. The brass knocker hung still, motionless, ordinary, lifeless. A terrible stillness filled the space, the kind of stillness that comes after something important has slipped away. "Elias!" he shouted, his voice cracking. No one answered. They searched the entire plantation, the cabins, the fields, the woods, the garden sheds, even the creek behind the old mill. No trace, no footprint, no torn cloth, nothing. Elias Turner had vanished as if he'd never existed. Whispers spread through the enslaved quarters like wind through leaves, quiet voices carrying fear and wonder in equal measure. Leela swore she had seen a strange light near the big house before sunrise. Henry said he heard the knocker tap one last time before it fell silent forever. Some said the doorway swallowed him. Others believed the spirits took him to keep him safe. But Mama Ruth said almost nothing. She sat by her fire with her hands folded in her lap and a calm expression on her face, as though she alone understood exactly what had happened. Later that morning, the colonel ordered the knocker removed, unable to bear the sight of it. But when Caleb tried again to loosen the screws, they turned easily this time. The metal lifted from the door without a fight, falling into Caleb's hands with no more resistance than a piece of fruit plucked from a tree. It had become ordinary, just brass, just metal. The knocker was tossed in the attic among broken lanterns, moldy trunks, and discarded furniture. It never moved on its own again. Still, on certain nights when the wind rattled the shutters, servants swore they heard 3 faint taps echo through the high rafters. They told each other the knocker was remembering Elias, or maybe calling to someone new. Years passed. Davenport Plantation continued its cruel grind. Then came war. Union soldiers swept through North Florida and burned the Davenport Manor to the ground. The enslaved were freed by law and by fire. As the plantation dissolved, more stories about Elias began to spread. Some said he had run north and joined a free settlement. Others believed he walked straight into heaven. Some swore they saw him in their dreams, standing beneath 2 moons, surrounded by people who looked at peace. Mama Ruth lived only 2 more years after Elias disappeared. On her deathbed, when her breath was thin and her eyes clouded, she smiled suddenly and said softly,
I see him. That boy done found something better." They thought it was fever talk, but others knew better. They knew the truth lived in the cracks between the ordinary world and the one Elias had walked into. Over time, people kept Elias Turner's name alive, not as a runaway, not as a ghost, but as a possibility, a whisper, a story told in low voices around night fires, a reminder that even in a world built on chains, there were doors that could open if someone was brave enough to step through. Meanwhile, in the other world, the world of two moons and living stone, Elias grew older. He became a teacher, a guide, a quiet leader for the community that had formed there. He taught children to write their names. He taught adults to read scripture and stories.
He taught songs of home to people who feared they might forget the sound of Earth's wind or the shape of Earth's sky. He wrote down the tales of those who arrived after him, each story of an impossible door or window or crack in the world. These writings formed a record of freedom that no plantation ledger could ever erase. More people arrived over the years. A girl from Louisiana who stepped through a cellar door. A boy from North Carolina who walked into a broken church and found himself in the new world instead of the pews. A woman from Texas who followed a strange bird through her own reflection and came out beneath the two moons. Every arrival confirmed the presence had kept its promise. It was still opening doors, still answering suffering, still offering keys to those brave enough to take them. Sometimes the newcomers asked Elias what this place was, whether it was heaven or some land God had carved for the enslaved. Elias always shook his head gently. "I don't know what it is," he would say, "but I know what it ain't." "What's that?" they'd ask. "It ain't a place where you gotta bow your head to another man." People built homes from the warm stone. Families grew. Fields of bright, strange crops were planted. Children laughed freely, and every night the double moons lit the land with soft, shifting blues and golds. Sometimes Elias would walk among the homes and see children playing without fear. No overseer shouting, no bell ringing to summon them, no weight of a future shaped by violence and ownership. Their joy felt like rebirth, like proof that something sacred had taken root. On what would have been his 50th birthday in earthly years, Elias sat on the hill overlooking the settlement. Two moons rose above him. Warm wind brushed against his skin. Fires flickered below as people cooked, sang, and told stories. He remembered everything he had left behind. The Davenport house, the knocker, Mama Ruth's hands on his, the cold that had wrapped around him the night the presence spoke. But he did not regret his choice, not for a moment. He had walked through a door into the unknown and found a home where no whip could reach, no chain could hold, no master could claim. Sometimes he wondered if the presence still traveled between worlds, if it still listened for voices calling out in pain, if it still searched for thresholds where hope might be born. And sometimes, just when the wind shifted in a particular way, Elias felt certain it was listening, that it remembered him, and that it still kept its promise. Years passed in that world beneath the twin moons, years that no longer measured themselves in cotton harvests, overseer shouts, or the rising and falling misery of plantation seasons. Time flowed differently here, not marked by chains, but by choice, by the lives people built with their own hands. Elias lived among those who had stepped through impossible thresholds, each one pulled from the crushing grip of a world that had never offered them mercy. He grew older. Wisps of gray threaded through his hair. Fine lines appeared at the corners of his eyes, carved by laughter as often as sorrow. His shoulders broadened, not from labor demanded, but from labor freely offered. And through it all, he never forgot the place he had come from, the fields of North Florida, the Davenport plantation, Mama Ruth's fire, the steady, impossible tapping of the brass knocker that had called him out of bondage. By now, the community stretched across the warm stone plains in clusters of homes made from vine and crystal, wood and earth. People had built wells, gardens, communal halls. Children who had never known slavery grew up beneath the light of 2 moons, running through fields of violet grass that swayed like silk. Some families had even discovered animals in this world, creatures gentle and curious, nothing like the beasts of burden back on earth. Elias watched these children often. Their freedom was different, untouched, pure. It made him feel both grateful and wistful. He wondered what he might have become if the world he was born into had allowed him this kind of innocence. Sometimes at night, older folks gathered by great fires and told stories of the old world, tales of ancestors, of lost families, of strength and survival. Elias would sit among them, listening quietly, always with one eye turned upward to the twin moons. He never said it aloud, but part of him always listened for the faintest echo of a knocker tapping somewhere between stars. Because he knew, somewhere out there, it was still happening. Somewhere, someone was stepping through. Somewhere, a door was opening for the one who needed it most. He knew because newcomers continued to arrive. Not often, not every month or even every season, but they came. They appeared from shadowed doorways, shimmering cracks in the air, the bottom of wells, the backs of closets. Each one stumbled into the world dazed but alive, terrified but hopeful, and Elias was always there to welcome them. He never acted like a savior, never proclaimed himself a leader, but his calm presence carried weight. His voice soothed panic, his wisdom guided without force. People followed him not because they had to, but because something in him felt steady, like a river that knew its path. When new arrivals asked him why they had been chosen, he always answered gently. It wasn't choosing. It was answering. Answering what? Your cry for more. Your cry for something different than what they gave you back there. Some cried when he said that. Some fell to their knees and prayed. Some simply stared at him as if seeing him for the first time.
The records Elias kept in a long scroll, stitched together from plant fibers, grew thicker each year. He wrote down every name, every origin, every story. It became a book of liberation, a testament to the doors that had opened when hope seemed impossible. Over time, the people began calling him Keeper Elias, keeper of stories, keeper of arrivals, keeper of the memory of why this community existed at all. He never asked for such a title, but he carried it with quiet dignity. He never returned to the place he'd come from. He never wanted to, but he did think about it, often. Especially when the double moons rose in a certain way, casting overlapping shadows like interlocked hands across the hills. In those moments, he remembered everything. The feel of the cotton fields beneath his feet, the sound of Caleb Davenport's angry voice, the smell of the Florida pines after rain, Mama Ruth humming an old spiritual in the deep of night, and the knocker, that strange, shining brass knocker, lifting itself without a hand behind it.
He remembered the cold that wrapped around him the night before he stepped through. He remembered the presence asking, "Why do you hesitate?" He remembered the choice that changed everything. And sometimes, when he walked alone along the ridges of warm stone where the settlement met the horizon, he swore he felt the presence again, just a flicker, just a whisper, passing by on its way to another suffering soul. He would close his eyes and whisper back, "Keep your promise." And the wind would stir, soft and sure, as though answering, "I am trying." One night, when the air shimmered with the pale glow of the larger moon, Elias sat on a high ledge overlooking the entire settlement. Fires twinkled below like tiny stars, laughter drifted through the air. A baby cried somewhere, only to be soothed by a lullaby. And above it all, the sky stretched vast and welcoming, holding constellations that were no longer strange to him. He thought about how he had once been counted only as property, how men with ledgers and cold eyes had evaluated him like livestock, how he had feared that his life would begin and end in chains. And he thought about how wrong they had been. He closed his eyes. He let the warm breeze brush his skin. He let the sound of life, true life, free life, carry him. Some said later that they saw him smiling that night. Others said they heard him humming a song Mama Ruth had taught him. No one agreed on the details, but everyone agreed on one thing. He looked at peace. When morning came, Elias was gone. No doorway, no crack of light, no sign of struggle. Just gone, the same way he had left the world before. Some believed he had walked deeper into this new land, seeking the presence once more. Some said he had stepped through another door, guiding more souls somewhere beyond even this world. Others believed he had simply become part of the place he helped build, woven into the wind, the warm stone, the twin moonlight. No one feared, no one mourned. They celebrated, because they knew Elias Turner of Florida had crossed another threshold, this time not to escape, but to continue a journey he had begun long ago. Back on Earth, long after the Davenport house burned and the plantation dissolved into ruins, people still told the story of a man who walked through a door that wasn't a door, of a knocker that tapped with no hand behind it, of a slave who left no trail except the sound that echoed in the night. Parents whispered the tale to their children, who whispered it to theirs, until Elias Turner belonged not just to one plantation, not just to one state, but to the whole of American folklore. And somewhere, in the spaces between worlds, in places where suffering gathers like storm clouds, the present still waits, patient and listening, ready to open the next door for the next brave soul willing to step through. A knock, a choice, a step into the unknown, and that was the truest freedom of all.